Imagine walking through the frozen Arctic and stumbling upon something that hasn't seen daylight in thousands of years. A creature perfectly preserved, as if it had been frozen in time. Nature has been keeping some of history's most incredible creatures in pristine condition for thousands of years. From an Ice Age wolf pup to a mummified bison that was actually eaten, yeah, you heard that right, these discoveries have raised some huge questions about how these animals lived and how they died. These are 5 more of the most incredible animals ever found frozen in ice, starting with a perfectly preserved Ice Age puppy found in the frozen tundra of Siberia. That in itself is a crazy discovery, but what scientists found inside this little guy, even crazier. This 14,000-year-old puppy was unearthed from the permafrost in Tumat, Siberia, back in 2011. It's so well preserved that it still has fur, teeth, and even a full stomach. Now, here's the thing. Scientists weren't even sure if this was a dog or a wolf, but what they did know was that it belonged to the Ice Age, a time when these canines roamed alongside some of the most legendary prehistoric animals. And something that makes things even more interesting is that since it dates back 14,000 years, it could be an early transitional species, from the time when wolves were first being domesticated into early dogs. But that's when they found something completely unexpected. During the examination, researchers opened up the puppy's stomach, and inside they found a piece of tissue. At first, they thought it belonged to a cave lion, which would have made sense. These were apex predators back then. But when they ran DNA tests at Stockholm's Natural History Museum, the results came back with a near perfect match for a woolly rhinoceros. A puppy ate a woolly rhino. Can you believe that? Now keep in mind the woolly rhino went extinct around 14,000 years ago, right around the same time this puppy died. So that means there's a real possibility that this little canine ate one of the last woolly rhinos to ever walk the earth. That alone is mind-blowing. But what's even stranger, the puppy died almost immediately after eating it. That's the big mystery. Scientists don't know how this puppy ended up with rhino meat in its stomach. Did it scavenge a baby rhino carcass? Did its pack take down a weakened adult? Or, one of the most terrifying possibilities, did the mother rhino take her revenge? We don't know, but what we do know is that this is the only frozen Ice Age carnivore ever found with an undigested piece of prey still inside it. But sometimes, the ice doesn't just preserve individual animals. It literally freezes entire ancient ecosystems in place. And that's exactly what happened on the frozen coast of Antarctica, where scientists uncovered something that looked like a freshly abandoned penguin colony. But these weren't your regular penguins. They were actually thousands of years old. Back in 2016, biologist Steve Emsley traveled to Cape Izar and was immediately confused by what he saw. The ground is covered in bones, eggshells, and even mummified penguin chicks, all sitting out in the open like the birds had just left. He knew that Adelaide penguins, yeah, the amigos, the cute little penguins from the movie Happy Feet, hadn't nested there in modern times. So where had all these remains come from? The mummies looked shockingly fresh, but there was no record of penguins breeding at the site ever. The answer? Shifting climate had just uncovered a ghost colony that had been buried under the ice for nearly 1,000 years. At some point, hundreds, maybe even thousands of penguins were nesting here, raising their chicks and covering the ground in their signature pebble nests. Then, around 800 years ago, during the Little Ice Age, the entire colony was buried under snow and ice, frozen in time. For centuries, the site was completely hidden. The penguins vanished, and no one even knew they had ever lived there. But now, thanks to rising global temperatures and increased Antarctic ice melt, their lost colony is finally being uncovered. And here's what makes this discovery even crazier. The remains look fresh because they were essentially freeze-dried by the cold, dry air. But they're not fresh at all. When scientists radiocarbon dated the bones, eggshells, and feathers, they found they were between 800 and 5,000 years old. That means some of these penguins haven't been seen since before the Egyptian pyramids were built. And here's the wild part. Cape Izar might become a penguin colony again. So while we're watching ancient penguins emerge from the ice, we might also be witnessing the start of a brand new colony in the very same spot. In 2016, a gold miner working in the Klondike goldfields of Yukon, Canada, stumbled across something unbelievable. A completely mummified gray wolf pup. Not a dire wolf, but a gray wolf. The very wolves we have roaming the continent to this day. This little guy was preserved in permafrost for 57,000 years. And this wasn't just a skeleton or partial remains. This little wolf, named Zur by the local police, was the most complete Ice Age wolf specimen ever discovered. She still had fur, skin, muscles, even internal organs. And if that wasn't crazy enough, scientists were even able to figure out how she died. Zur's remains were sent to the Des Moines University in Iowa, where researchers performed radiocarbon dating, DNA sequencing, and X-ray scans to piece together her story. The first thing they learned, Zur was just 7 weeks old when she died. Now, Ice Age wolves were thought to primarily hunt bison and musk oxen, but when scientists examined Zur's bones, they found something unexpected. Her diet was mostly fish, specifically Chinook salmon from the Klondike River. That means wolves in ancient Yukon weren't just big game hunters. They were opportunistic fish eaters, just like some modern wolves in Alaska today. But the biggest mystery was how Zur ended up alone. When scientists studied her remains, they noticed something strange. She had no obvious injuries, no signs of starvation, no predators had scavenged her body. So what happened? The best guess? A den collapsed. Zur may have been inside her den when it suddenly caved in, instantly burying her in an airtight, freezing environment, which is why she's so perfectly preserved today. But that raises another question. Where was the rest of her family? Wolves don't typically leave pups alone at this age, which means her mother and siblings may have been outside the den when it collapsed, leaving Zur trapped inside, alone. Or maybe she was the only pup in the litter, something rare but not impossible. Whatever happened, her body remained untouched for 57,000 years, locked in ice until now. Zur is now being studied to learn more about Ice Age wolves, their evolution, and how they moved between North America and Eurasia over the Bering Land Bridge. Her mitochondrial DNA shows that she was related to both ancient Yukon wolves and Russian gray wolves, proving that wolves were crossing continents long before humans ever stepped foot in the Americas. Ancient wolves frozen in their den for thousands of years is wild enough, but what about a tiny Ice Age squirrel curled up in a perfect little ball, looking like it could wake up at any second? That is exactly what miners in Canada found when they uncovered something that didn't even look like an animal at first. But once researchers got a closer look, they started noticing tiny hands, little claws, a tail, even ears. That is when they realized they were looking at something incredibly rare, a perfectly preserved Arctic ground squirrel that had been frozen in the permafrost for 30,000 years. And the best part? This species still exists today. This little guy was likely hibernating when it died, which explains why it was curled up into a tight ball, just like modern Arctic ground squirrels do today when they settle into their underground dens for the winter. Now, here's where things gets a little bit unusual. Researchers almost never find actual preserved Arctic ground squirrels like this. What they usually find are empty nests, the remains of burrows that these animals lined with leaves and grass to keep warm. The squirrels themselves, they almost never make it. But since unraveling the squirrel could have damaged it, scientists x-rayed the body to see what was inside. They expected to find deteriorated skeletons since calcium tends to leak out of bones over thousands of years. But to their shock, Hester's skeleton was almost perfectly intact, looking nearly identical to a modern Arctic ground squirrel. The Klondike goldfields where Hester was found are an absolute hotspot for frozen animal discoveries. The next Ice Age animal on this list wasn't just preserved, it was so well kept that scientists actually ate part of it. Yeah, this story gets pretty weird. 39 years ago, scientists unearthed a perfectly preserved steppe bison from the Ice Age. This thing had been locked in ice for 55,000 years. Its muscles, skin, and even its fur were still intact. Scientists from the University of Alaska Fairbanks quickly stepped in to excavate it, led by paleontologist Dale Guthrie. The team named it Blue Babe after the bluish tint the frozen skin had developed over time. But what Guthrie did next, that is where things take a turn. For some reason, Guthrie had an idea that defies logic. He sliced off a piece of Blue Babe's neck, cooked it up with veggies, and threw a dinner party where he and his guests actually ate the meat of a 55,000-year-old bison. Now, in case you're wondering what ancient bison actually tastes like, according to Guthrie's wife, Mary Lee, it was not great. She later told interviewers that it was worse than beef jerky, tough, dry, and extremely gamey, which we probably all experienced when taking old meat out of the freezer. Guthrie himself described the smell as earthy, but not unpleasant. Still, they finished the meal, toasted to the Ice Age, and celebrated what they called a connection to the deep history of human existence. Blue Babe itself wasn't entirely eaten, thankfully. The full reconstructed specimen is now on display at the University of Alaska Museum, where visitors can see one of the best preserved Ice Age bison ever found. And while eating frozen prehistoric animals is not exactly a standard scientific protocol, Blue Babe remains one of the most fascinating Ice Age discoveries ever made. Personally, if I were to find Blue Babe in the ice and somebody offered me a slice of steak, I'd totally take it, try it in a heartbeat. Let me know if you would too. Let me know if you guys like these frozen in ice videos, or if you'd like me to cover some other topics. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.